So the purpose overall is to understand the role that trauma plays in our development on all levels. To experience the importance and usefulness of breathwork in healing the effects of trauma. To engage in exercises and learn techniques which can safely and effectively be employed when working with trauma in a healing session. And finally, to assist in integrating clarity and passion into our lives and the lives of those with whom we work. And I believe that our work with trauma isn't just dealing with the unfortunate things that happen to people and to bring them back to normal functioning. I aspire to something more than that. I believe a lot of what are the so-called accidents or traumatic events in life can be wake-up calls, can be an opportunity to go further than I would have gone without that happening. In the old Latin terminology, that's called the felix culpa, which is kind of paradoxical. It means the happy sin.
Aren't they all?
It means with every wounding, as we know, there's a chance to gain strength that wouldn't have been there without it. And so I don't look at people who have had trauma and have the courage to want to deal with it, learn from it, and grow from it as the unfortunate lot in life. I often see them as teachers, as people who, in one sense, have had the courage to not just sit in the bleachers of life and make a commentary on it, but are out there full force and on the playing field.
Life is a full contact sport.
It certainly is. And it does not have to be devastating. And that's what we're learning. So someone mentioned recently being in the school of hard knocks, but learning a lot softer lessons. So it's not really necessary. Hopefully we can learn from what we've done and how we treated one another in the past as human beings on the planet. Hopefully we can learn from that and make our lessons more joyous. And that's really what this seminar is about. So, a little overview. We're going to look at the definition and causes and specific symptoms of trauma, the biological nature of trauma, and how mindfulness has been employed with it, but specifically breath work in healing trauma. And then, tools to use in conjunction with breath work. Basic techniques that can be employed either during a breathwork session or before or after. I want to put a little focus on spirituality and trauma healing and compassion fatigue, what happens often to people who work with trauma. So, trauma. Severe trauma can result from a stressful occurrence. On the physical level, Peter Levine, one of the early researchers in this area, says the heart of the matter lies in being able to recognize that trauma represents animal instinct gone awry. If anyone is overwhelmed by a threat and is unable to successfully defend him or herself, i.e. respond from an instinctual nature, they can become stuck in their survival mode. This highly aroused state is intended solely to enable short-term defensive action. Left untreated over time, it can form the symptoms of trauma. When an individual is unable to flow through trauma and complete instinctive responses, these incomplete actions often undermine his or her life. So it's not the event that is traumatic. It's the individual's perception of and capacity or incapacity to respond to the event. Trauma is the frozen, undischarged energy held in the body and the mind that is often associated with feelings of defeat and helplessness. Under 20% of the population is predisposed to respond to severe stress in a highly traumatized manner. Now, this was new information for me, and this is some of the things that's being discovered in neurobiological research. You'd say, well, anyone who had gone through war, or some of the things I'll mention in a few minutes, which many people experience severe trauma, would be traumatized for life. No, it's not the case. In the research that they're looking at now, 20% of the population will respond in a severe way. and it will continue. It's not that others are impervious to it, of course, but they will heal much more easily and readily release the effects of it. Dan Siegel suggests that from the study of attachment disorders, that chaotic and or terrifying exposure to a major parenting figure may have a significant role in this predisposition. In other words, well, why are those 20% people different? This is just a suggestion. But in their research, those that have been exposed to a parent that's very chaotic in their emotional response or terrifying, these people later on in life, when exposed to a highly traumatic situation, it affects them more profoundly. Nonetheless, not everyone who is exposed to the same extreme circumstances will develop the severe symptoms of trauma. So, the causes of trauma. The perception of threat is the critical factor. The causes of trauma can be divided into two major categories. Events that are most frequently traumatic to whoever experiences them. And then, secondly, common, jarring, unexpected events that can be traumatic under certain circumstances. So there's a distinction here between having severe, long-lasting effects versus those who are able to overcome the effects in a reasonable time with support. And I will hand you another diagram a little later, and you'll actually see a chart there of how different people heal or overcome the effects of trauma. So the first category includes obvious causes of trauma. War, severe childhood abuse, experiencing or witnessing violence, rape, assault, catastrophic injuries and illnesses, and the loss of a loved one. The second category includes seemingly ordinary events that traumatize more often than we might expect. This is a list of potentially traumatizing occurrences that may not be so obvious. A minor automobile accident, invasive medical and dental procedures, particularly when performed on children who are restrained or anesthetized. Even adults who rationally know that these are helpful may experience certain procedures as an attack. The body does. Circumcision. There's been a certain amount of research on this. It's been shown in large-scale research that the most warring nations on the planet are those that medically and religiously promote circumcision.
Interesting.
Think about all these men going around wanting to get even with someone. Falls and other minor injuries. Natural disasters. Illnesses, especially with high fevers. Accidental poisoning. Abandonment. Prolonged immobilization, especially for children. Exposure to extreme heat or cold, sudden loud noises, and birth itself. Again, that's not saying that everyone who experiences these is traumatized, but indeed it can happen. And if a client comes in, or you're working with a client, and they mention these, don't automatically assume either that they're inconsequential or that they're traumatic.